Power, money, influence. These are the currencies men like Harrison Blackwood live by. A billionaire real estate mogul, hailed as the king of Chicago's skyline, Harrison wasn't just rich, he was untouchable. He built skyscrapers that kissed the clouds, made politicians dance to his tune, and crushed anyone who dared stand in his way. Tonight, in his glittering penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, he was about to close a deal worth $500 million, viewed $1 billion. A deal that would forever secure his dominance, not just in America, but across the Pacific. The room glowed with polished marble, Italian rugs, and million-dollar art pieces. At the head of the long obsidian table sat Harrison, a wolf in a designer suit, grinning at his Japanese business partner across from him. A signed contract meant control of Chicago's future. His empire would double overnight. But empires don't always fall to rivals. Sometimes they collapse because of a whisper, soft, unexpected, impossible to ignore. In the corner of that penthouse, almost invisible, stood Abigail Riley, 12 years old, clutching her worn-out backpack. She was just the maid's daughter, a shadow in her mother's world of silent servitude. No one noticed her, and no one cared, but Abigail had a gift, an ear for languages, sharpened by curiosity and countless hours of reading. When her eyes fell on the Japanese contract her mother was dusting moments earlier, her stomach tightened. The words didn't say what Harrison claimed. They weren't about shared profit. They were about theft, betrayal, and a trap laid for unsuspecting investors. Abigail stepped forward, her voice trembling yet firm. That's not what it says. The room froze, and with those words, a $500 million empire began to crack. Soul. Backhand index pointing right. If you love powerful stories like this, where the underdog exposes the mighty, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Harrison Blackwood wasn't just a billionaire. He was a myth living among men, a figure whose shadow loomed as tall as the skyscrapers he built. Every tower in Chicago seemed to whisper his name. Each steel beam and pane of glass reflected his ambition. The newspapers called him the king of the skyline, and for good reason. He had money, power, and a ruthlessness that left competitors in ruins. Harrison didn't buy buildings. He bought loyalty, silence, and control. His penthouse, perched above the glittering city, wasn't simply a home, it was a throne room. The marble floors gleamed under golden light, priceless paintings adorned the walls, and every inch of space radiated excess. Guests who entered here understood immediately. They weren't meeting a man, they were entering the presence of an empire. And at the head of a long black glass table sat Harrison himself, leaning back in a custom chair stitched from rare Italian leather. Across from him was Mr. Kenji Sato, a Japanese businessman with the calm confidence of someone used to deals worth millions. Tonight's contract, however, wasn't measured in millions. It was worth $500 million, a skyscraper project that would alter Chicago's skyline forever. Harrison wanted this deal not only for profit, but for legacy. A $500 million tower would cement his name in history. He slid the thick contract across the table, his manicured fingers tapping the Japanese text like a magician, revealing a trick. This clause guarantees double returns within 3 years, Harrison said smoothly. His grin was confident, polished, and dangerous. He knew none of these men would dare question him. They never did. The investors exchanged nods, trusting his charm and reputation. Why shouldn't they? Harrison had never lost, at least not publicly. In the corner, unnoticed as always, Abigail Riley hugged her faded backpack. Just 12 years old, she was the daughter of the maid pouring drinks in silence. Invisible, unimportant, or so they thought. But Abigail's eyes, bright with curiosity and sharpened by countless hours studying languages, scanned the page. She could read every line, and what she saw made her blood run cold. This wasn't about doubling profits. The words promised something else entirely, control stripped from the investors, wealth funneled solely into Harrison's empire, a trap disguised as opportunity. Abigail's pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to look away, to pretend she hadn't seen it, but she couldn't, not tonight. Because sometimes the smallest voice can pierce the loudest lies. The air in the penthouse was thick with quiet tension, the kind of silence that hums beneath the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter. Harrison Blackwood thrived in these moments. Deals like this were chess matches, and he believed he was always 5 moves ahead. With every confident word, With every flash of his diamond-studded watch, he drew the investors deeper into his web. Mr. Soto adjusted his glasses and glanced briefly at the Japanese text. His English was strong, but out of courtesy he relied on the translation Harrison provided. Everything seemed polished, airtight, professional. Why wouldn't it be? This was Harrison Blackwood. The man had never left a crack for anyone to crawl through. But 12-year-old Abigail Riley saw what no one else did. She sat small and silent, almost blending into the tall curtains behind her. Her mother, bent over a silver tray of drinks, shot her a glance as if to remind her, "Don't make noise, don't be noticed, don't be noticed." Yet Abigail's eyes refused to look away from the document. The kanji script pulled her attention like a magnet. She had spent years secretly teaching herself Japanese, flipping through old dictionaries from the library, watching anime with subtitles, pausing and repeating until the words sank in. It was her secret world, something no one in Harrison's palace of wealth cared about. Sisada. Now that secret was screaming at her. The contract wasn't what Harrison claimed. The elegant kanji lines described terms so one-sided they weren't just unfair, they were predatory. The investors weren't being promised double profits. They were signing away control, handing over their rights, and locking themselves into a trap they couldn't escape. Her heart pounded. This can't be real. Did I read that correctly? She blinked, tracing the words again and again, but the meaning was clear. Harrison wasn't offering a partnership. He was staging a theft. $500 million disguised behind the beauty of formal language. Abigail's throat tightened. She wanted to warn her mother, but how? Speaking up here could humiliate them both. They were nobodies in this world of power suits and gold watches. A maid's daughter had no right to interrupt billionaires, but silence would mean complicity. And for a girl who valued truth above fear, silence was impossible. Her fingers dug into her backpack straps as if squeezing courage from the fabric. Fuck. She looked at the table, then at Harrison, then at the Japanese guest about to sign his name. Her lips parted. The words trembled on her tongue. She was about to shatter the illusion. Abigail's voice broke through the polished silence like a crack in glass. "Oh, that's not what it says," she whispered at first, then louder, steadying herself. "That's not what it says." The room froze. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the city lights outside the towering glass windows. Every eye turned, not toward the billionaire at the head of the table, but toward the child standing in the corner. Harrison Blackwood's brow arched in disbelief. He almost laughed. A maid's daughter, interrupting him, of all people. "Excuse me?" he said smoothly, though his smile carried an edge of danger. "And what exactly do you think it says?" Abigail's heart thumped against her ribs. She wanted to shrink back, to disappear under the weight of their stares. But she remembered the words clearly, every character sharp in her mind. She stepped forward, clutching her backpack like a shield. "It doesn't promise double profits," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "It says your company must surrender all rights, all ownership, and all returns. It's not an investment, it's a takeover." Gasps rippled around the table. Mr. Soto's eyes widened. The other investors exchanged alarmed looks, suddenly uncertain. Harrison chuckled, a low and dismissive sound. "A child claims to understand complex legal contracts in Japanese. Listen, Japanese." His words dripped with sarcasm. He leaned back in his chair, attempting to turn the moment into a joke. "Gentlemen, let's not be distracted." But Abigail wasn't laughing. She pressed on, reciting a full line in fluent Japanese, her pronunciation crisp and flawless. And then, in English, she translated word for word. There was no mistaking her accuracy. The investors stared at her, their confidence in Harrison wavering with every syllable that left the girl's mouth. Mr. Soto leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. He pulled the document closer and compared her translation with the text. His jaw tightened. She was right. Every word the child spoke matched the contract in front of him. Harrison's calm mask cracked. His fingers tapped sharply on the table, betraying his irritation. "Enough of this nonsense," he snapped. "You're embarrassing yourself and your mother." Abigail's mother stood frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched the tray. She wanted to apologize, to drag her daughter away, but even she could see the fire in Abigail's eyes. The truth mattered more than fear. The room was no longer under Harrison Blackwood's control. A single voice, young, uninvited, and unexpected, had shifted the power dynamic completely. The investors weren't looking at Harrison anymore. They were looking at Abigail Riley. And Harrison knew, for the first time in years, that he wasn't untouchable. The polished mask Harrison wore for decades was beginning to crack. His smile had vanished, replaced by a scowl that deepened with every second of silence in the room. For the first time in years, Harrison Blackwood wasn't in control. Mr. Soto's hand trembled slightly as he pushed the contract away from him. His sharp eyes scanned the lines Abigail had pointed out, his lips pressing into a thin, grim line. She's right, he said finally, his English measured but cold. Every word she spoke is accurate. The room erupted. Investors who had been silent moments earlier now leaned forward in outrage, their voices overlapping. "What kind of trick is this?" one demanded. Another slammed his palm against the table. "Were you planning to rob us blind, Harrison?" Abigail stood frozen, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She hadn't expected to be believed so quickly, yet the truth was undeniable. The kanji on the page spoke louder than Harrison's charm ever could. Harrison rose abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the marble floor. "This is ridiculous," he barked, trying to regain dominance. "Or going to take the word of a child over mine? A maid's daughter." His voice thundered in the penthouse, but instead of commanding respect, it reeked of desperation. Mr. Sato didn't flinch. A child who speaks truth is more valuable than a man who lives in lies. The blow landed heavier than any physical strike. Harrison's face flushed crimson. For years, he'd controlled rooms with nothing but his presence, but tonight, the authority slipped from his grasp. The investors now turned on him, demanding answers, their voices sharp, angry, unforgiving. Security guards hovered at the edge of the room, uncertain. Should they remove the girl? Should they silence the chaos? No one moved. The balance of power had shifted too far. Abigail's mother finally reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it with tears brimming in her eyes. She whispered, "You were brave, Abby." For the first time, pride outweighed her fear. The headlines were already writing themselves in the minds of those present. Chicago billionaire caught in $500 million scam. Harrison realized it too. His empire of glass and steel, his meticulously crafted image, his $500 million deal, all of it was collapsing because of 12 simple words spoken in perfect Japanese. He turned his glare on Abigail, eyes burning with fury. "I'll regret this," he muttered under his breath. But deep down, he knew it wasn't her he needed to fear. It was the truth. Because in that moment, Harrison Blackwood, king of Chicago's skyline, had been dethroned by the voice of a child. The fallout was immediate. Within hours of the meeting, whispers spread through Chicago's business elite. By dawn, whispers became headlines. By noon, headlines became breaking news across the country. A billionaire Harrison Blackwood exposed in $500 million scam. Cameras swarmed outside his towering headquarters. Protesters gathered with signs, chanting for justice. Politicians who once praised him now distanced themselves, condemning his deceit. Stockholders demanded answers, lawsuits piled high, and the empire Harrison built over decades crumbled in days. But in that glittering penthouse, as chaos erupted around him, one image haunted Harrison most, the small figure of Abigail Riley standing tall, her voice cutting through the lies. He had faced senators, rivals, and billion-dollar lawsuits, but never had he been undone by the courage of a child. Abigail, meanwhile, was overwhelmed. Reporters tried to find her, stories painted her as a hero, and her schoolmates whispered about her bravery. She wasn't used to attention. For years, she had been invisible, overlooked as just the maid's daughter. Now she was the girl who stopped a billionaire. Her mother, too, felt the shift. No longer just a servant in the shadows, she stood with pride, knowing her daughter's courage had not only protected powerful investors, but also revealed to the world that integrity can come from the most unexpected places. Mr. Sato personally visited Abigail and her mother days later. He bowed deeply, a gesture of immense respect in his culture, and said, "You saved us all from ruin. Courage like yours is rare, and it must never be forgotten." He offered to fund Abigail's education, ensuring her gift for languages and her spirit for truth would never go to waste. Meanwhile, Harrison Blackwood faced investigations, his assets frozen, his reputation shattered. The man who once stood untouchable atop Chicago's skyline was now a symbol of greed, undone by honesty. He would fight in courtrooms, but the public had already decided his fate. For Abigail, life didn't suddenly become easy. But she had learned something powerful. Even the smallest voice could echo louder than the tallest skyscraper. She was no longer invisible. She was a reminder that truth has weight and courage has power, and for the city of Chicago, the skyline looked a little different. The tower still gleamed, but now people remembered that no empire, no matter how high it rises, is safe from the truth. In the end, this wasn't just a story about wealth or betrayal. It was about courage. A billionaire with money, influence, and power nearly robbed the world of $500 million. Yet it wasn't lawyers, journalists, or rival tycoons who stopped him. It was a 12-year-old girl who refused to stay silent. Abigail Riley taught us something unforgettable. Integrity doesn't depend on age, status, or wealth. It comes from choosing what's right, even when your voice shakes, even when you stand alone. Her bravery exposed lies, protected lives, and reminded the world that truth, once spoken, cannot be silenced. So remember this: empires can rise and fall. Money can build towers and buy influence, but it only takes one honest voice to bring down the mightiest of liars. Backhand index pointing right. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales where the unexpected hero changes everything.